Well, just give me an all clear. You can see that, please, Rob.
All clear, mate.
Thank you. All right. Well, gents and ladies, welcome along to another week in the webinar series for Trust in Crisis. I'm Grant Chisnall, and thanks for joining me today. Today, we're going to be going through debriefing, which is quite timely given the fact that, particularly here in Melbourne, we're coming out of a long-term response and a long-term lockdown from COVID. And I know that speaking to a lot of different organisations, they've been in a long-term crisis management mode. So it's important when you're coming out of that mode that you take the opportunity to capture those lessons earned through the difficulties that you've gone through, capture the things that worked well and the things that didn't work so well, and look at the ways that you can improve not just the overall mechanics of your response, but also the dynamics of your team and the way that you're working together as part of these responses. Quick overview of myself. You can reach out to me at grant@leftofboom.com.au. I also have that leader guide, Trust in Crisis, available for you for download. If you haven't got a copy, just message me. I can email a copy to you. And then lastly, I've got the podcast Crisis Talks. Next episode to come out is actually going to be an episode interviewing a guy by the name of Clint Honeycutt, and we go through the response to the Gulf of Mexico BP Macondo oil spill, which is a fascinating case study of what happened in that response and the scale that came on board very quickly for that one. Next week's webinar, I'm actually going to go through a comparative case study, so more details follow at the end. We've just come off the back of a big weekend of sport, and I thought it would be a really good metaphor to kick us off for today. For debriefing, particularly when you're looking at high-performing teams. And we've seen Richmond's results, Storm's results over the weekend, and both of them you would definitely classify as high-performing teams. They've been at the peak of their powers for a number of years. They work really effectively together, and there's been some very good background stories about how the two teams, each of the individual teams rather, have connected with each individuals on different fronts within their teams to enable them to perform at the highest level. And we saw the results over the weekend. Why I think that's important for debriefing is because the way that sport debriefs is by a set routine, and it's very similar to the way that we used to do it in the military, where we'd have a set routine of debriefing. And that meant that it became a process that we would always apply. The more you can trust in that process, the more that you can build trust in each other, which becomes so important as a basis for your high-performing teams. Because trust really sits at the base of that whole high-performance pyramid. And trust in yourself, trust in each other, trust in your team, and trust in your process is what we really talk about. To enable that, you need to be really empowered. And where debriefing really comes into play is it looks at where those areas that you can help assist or how you can empower an appropriate response to whatever the situation may be. There's a common MO, a common modus operandi, or a common operating model is another component of high performance. It means that you know the structure or the mechanics of the way that you're working and then understands your process that you're applying or the routine that you're having. Individually excellent means that you are each of the people that are part of that high performing team are capable and are able to perform the role that they're there to perform. And at the end of the day, high performing teams are really task or mission oriented, not at the expense of the wider vision. So we're not looking at tunnel vision here, but we're looking at focused on a clear objective and ensuring that all the different elements are lined up behind that objective as part of an overall response. That way, when the environmental factors kick into play, the high performance teams can adjust or adapt to the different situations, and communication becomes so critical. And in the heat of a game, as we'll talk about in a second, the ability for the team to adapt to the different dynamics of the game style really comes down to the mechanics we're talking about here, of how they work together, and the process they apply to adapt to any situation as it emerges. Now, how footy debriefs. Now, some of us who are on here, I know, have played, and many of us play different team sports anyway, but I thought it was a good, again, metaphor for debriefing, looking at the way that high-performing teams, in particular, debrief in games. And you'll see that there's, on a quadrant model, we're looking at really formal at the top end and informal mechanisms that they apply. And you have either quick debriefings or more deliberate debriefings that are occurring. Top left quadrant, we're looking at really the pre and post game. So it's the quick, but they're formal. So it's a process that we're applying as a routine. It's generally the reviews post game. It's generally the line meetings or team meetings leading up to the week ahead, or looking at reviewing what they've done post game for that last week. Now, regardless of the fact that they just won a grand final, Richmond will be going through this process over the next week because I want to capture all of the lessons learned whilst they're still fresh in everyone's mind. So they'll go through that process still, despite them partying for the last few days. As a quick part of a debrief and more informal process, we're generally looking at in-play or in-flight debriefs. And they become important because they're able to pick up different aspects of what's happening out on the ground for a football context or a game-based context. Or if you're in your own corporate environment, it might be a floor walk with some of your team members to understand what's going on for that particular day. It might be a quick huddle that you have to look through the start of the day and the end of the day, what's happened, what's changed, what are the handover points we need to consider to continue the appropriate response. I hope that this is a process that's being applied pretty regularly or routinely within the contact tracing, because no doubt here in Victoria, there are a lot of lessons that people are picking up every day, and the ability for a team to very quickly share those different analysis points and make sure that the lessons are being carried forward become really crucial in improving your response as you're going along. So I'm sure it's happening. I hope it's happening. Love to see what the results are post the next few days anyway. On the deliberate but less formal side, you're looking again during game breaks. So it's where the teams will come together more often than not as part of their quarter time or halftime huddles. And that's part of a routine, and it's a deliberate process. It's where the coaches come down with feedback to the group, where they can reorientate the play, point out some changes or otherwise it might need to be made to adapt to the situation that they're seeing unfolding, or give that feedback by each of the line meetings to the players so that they can further understand what the different perspective looks like. The great thing about those more formalized debriefs is you're bringing together different perspectives. So up in the coach's box, behind the goalposts, the views that they're able to get from on the game are able to then be imparted on the players as part of the formal briefs at halftime and quarter time, so they can adjust what they're doing on game time. And last but not least, you've got the more deliberate and formal debriefs that are occurring either mid-season, end of season. They're your quarterly reviews and debriefs that happen. And if you look at it from a performance appraisal point of view, they would be those types of annual performance reviews that you're performing within your business. These ones, again, become really crucial when you're looking at a crisis response, because when you've had a long-term duration impact, those periodic reviews become a more formal appraisal process or review process, and again, identifies opportunities for you to pick up and improve. And also identifies opportunities to sustain, importantly, what you've done well. And the difficulty you find, I think, with debriefs is that we all tend to come with a bit of a pessimism bias. So we'll come into looking at a situation thinking we didn't go so well. The reality is, though, that there's often a lot of positive lessons that can be taken that we want to capture as part of whichever process you're using. And what this helps to do, though, from an overall organizational point of view, it helps to build a more adaptive organization that can respond to uncertainty, can respond to the different dynamics of different situations more effectively and with confidence. And so the intent really here is bringing together not just about the mechanics around the structure and stuff, structure and your common operating model, the way that you're communicating, your process that you're going through, or your plans that you've had. They're all the mechanics side of the fence. What we're looking here as well is really the dynamics and how you're building that trust through that debriefing process, because as people become more and more empowered, they can start to communicate more effectively and proactively, which means that you're getting further ahead of any situation. And really, we want to move from those responses being chaotic and unprepared or ad hoc to being more collaborative, proactive, and adaptive. And that middle line really is trust. And building that trust is so important as part of your process when you're debriefing. The other component really is about looking at the role that leaders play in a response and the values that you're demonstrating overall as an organisation. So the values are the proactive, empathetic, and assured. And the role that someone can play is really the supporter, the enabler, or the inspirer. Now, a lot of leaders will want to be that inspiring model or inspiring role model that will be out in front leading the charge. However, that may not be appropriate given the types of situation or the situational role that a leader needs to play. A great example in the fires last year, when the Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, came back from his ill-fated trip to Hawaii, he tried to overreach and be that inspirer, moving out to the fire ground. And what we saw very quickly was a backlash against that type of approach, of leadership approach. He would have been better served, and he has been better served throughout COVID, being the supporter or the enabler of the responses within the states rather than trying to overreach. Now, arguably, that might have gone the other way now in terms of the role that he's playing. However, it was a really good lesson in not overreaching, knowing your role, and in playing the role according to the situation that you're dealing with. So as adaptive leaders, we don't need to be out in front pushing and driving the charge, or driving the charge and pushing and dragging everyone along behind you. We want to try and pick the role where we can support, empower, and build up your team so that you can actually have the appropriate response from your whole team. Now, COVID-19 has thrown us all some really difficult challenges this year. And in the context of what we've dealt with, it's so important to use the opportunity that's presented from a crisis leadership and a crisis management point of view to understand what you've done well, to capture the lessons learned, and make sure that you're applying them within your teams going forward. We've got a lot of people out there that are very disconnected at the moment. They've been extremely overworked, and we're finding that the common operating model that they've had has been really thrown out the window. So we want to try and capture opportunities that we can learn from out of this whole response with the network model that we're operating in right now, and ensure that we're not going to break people in the long term. So part of this whole response, part of the review and debrief process, really needs to look at the ways of working, the common operating model and then the structures behind that to enable people to work more efficiently and more effectively and be better engaged and empowered in leading the way forward from here. So who participates? Everyone's involved, and ideally you want to try and capture the different layers. So it's quite difficult when you've got quite a large organization or you've had a large crisis team in particular in play. So you want to try and capture the different perspectives from those different layers. As I said before, that perspective, like we said about the halftime and quarter time huddles, becomes so crucial. So having some different perspectives in the overall response really ensures that we're not having any blind spots as a result of the review. So crisis management team might have thought their communication was amazing, but when you branch out and you realize that their messaging wasn't necessarily getting out to end users or end stakeholders, then that's a good feedback point that they need to know. So really you need to look at different layers of your response and make sure that they're all engaged as part of a debrief. Cross-functional and also different layered engagement in a debrief is actually really helpful there too. So you might have some tactical layer response people that are involved in an operational debrief, that are involved and connected with a strategic debrief. So again, it gives you really good perspectives across the whole organizational response, not just the one layer. What do you want to find out? So what happened, what worked, what didn't, what are the opportunities that you want to grow from? These are part of the scope that you really need to build out as part of a more formal debriefing process, because it enables then the people to have the appropriate input that you need in order to capture what you really want to learn from. Now, the other important parts here is really, what did you learn about yourselves and what did you learn as a team? So that's the dynamics piece that we keep talking about. Is it's not just about the process or the structure that you've applied or the plan, success or failure or otherwise. It's also about the team dynamics, the leadership commitment, and the engagement and communication links throughout. We often know that they're the biggest areas where people have a lot of concern. So we need to make sure we're capturing that to build out that feedback for the leaders and also the people engaged in the response. How you do them, how you can structure them is that informal or formal process. Now, more often than not, you're going to do the less formal debriefs probably in flight. So prior to a handover, prior to a changeover of shift in the crisis team, as part of a daily process or a daily routine, that again, they'll be sort of less formal, but they're all engaged and capturing, or all aimed rather, at capturing immediate lessons learned that can help improve that immediate response. The more deliberate formal PIRs or after action reviews or post-incident reviews, whatever the name that you want to call them are, those are more important than for capturing the whole organizational response. So again, how you do that and capture those at different levels becomes quite challenging because you've got a whole lot of different perspectives that you want to capture in a semi-uniform way. So some of the processes that I've used for those different debriefs would be either survey-based out to a wider audience that can then be used as part of a lessons capture exercise. Your more sort of workshop facilitated debriefs are often really effective because you're enabling all people that are involved to have an active voice. The challenge as a facilitator is that you need to ensure that they've got the comfort and the safety in that learning environment to actually present the issues that they've had. For executives, a lot of them like to do one-on-ones. That's a really time-consuming activity, but it does also enable some more indirect feedback or some more candid feedback from some of those executives, particularly if they're not comfortable in that wider environment, or we haven't got that safety in that wider environment. What that enables you at the end of the day, though, to do is, again, bring all the different perspectives together. So whichever mechanics that you apply to bring that together, it's important that you are converging that at some stage, either formally as part of a facilitated debrief or formally as part of a report, or whatever mechanism that you're applying to bring them together either remotely or otherwise. Look, the difficulty you'll find for the remote management is that you want to really make sure that you've got a real consistent approach to what you're capturing. So if you can't get them all together, then having that consistency in what you're seeking from them becomes really crucial. So the questions that you're asking them are an important starting point. And then the follow-up pieces that you do, bringing them together and converging the lessons learned also becomes really critical, because it gives them all the opportunity to see, learn, and understand what worked well and what didn't work well from all the different perspectives together. When's always the most difficult part, because as I've found out recently, there's still a lot of customers that I've got at the moment, or clients that are still operating at least a semi-routine crisis response. So there's a few different points that might come into play here. So first and foremost, you want to do it as soon as you can in order to capture those lessons while they're fresh in everyone's mind. If you've got an extended response, then in-flight debriefs really become crucial to capture those lessons as you're working along and ensure that you're picking up on what's working well and what's not working so well as part of your response. So in-flight as part of your ways of working becomes a really important step, especially for an extended response. Anytime you're looking at a shift change over handover, you want to do a quick debrief with your team before that, again, to capture those lessons and hand them over to the next team. So that becomes part of your routine as a matter of course process. When you want to close it down, the difficulty you find is that everyone's attention naturally goes to the next piece of work that they've got to do or getting back into their normal routine. So there's two ways you can look at this. You can either look at a debrief to close off your response, or a debrief immediately after you've closed down a response. So by that I mean you've transitioned your team out of the response. You've got a team that are focused on recovery, or you've got your organization recovery and business continuity plan in play and it's working through effectively. So you're starting to transition to a bit of business as usual. That becomes a crucial juncture where you want to debrief the response and make sure you're capturing those lessons before you formally hand over that team or immediately after. Either way, it is a bit of horses for courses, but the key things here, you don't want to do it too late after the fact because people forget. Secondly, you want to capture people while they're still there, while it's still fresh in their minds. And the other most important one, particularly when you're dealing with, workplace incidents and other sort of fatalities and other sort of higher sensitive activities or incidents or crisis events, it's really important to capture those people as well for the mental health and wellbeing component and the support for them immediately post for counselling. So they really serve a purpose of ensuring that you're not just capturing the functional, structural and process components or just the dynamics components, but you're actually also capturing it for the welfare and well-being of your people, and you're engaging in the appropriate support for them before they're permitted to depart on leave, or other sort of other absences from work post the immediate incident. I've been involved now in a number of workplace fatalities where we've activated crisis responses. And even for a lesser incident, there was one that I recall up in Queensland a long time ago now, where a gas pipeline had been ruptured accidentally by a work crew. The media turned up immediately on the scene. The work crew did a great job in the emergency response. They weren't debriefed immediately post, and subsequently they were permitted to go home on leave, etc. The guys who actually led that response did an amazing job, but they thought that they'd stuffed up because the media and others had turned up, and it was a big deal of it on the media in Queensland at the time. Now those guys thought that they'd done the wrong thing, when as a matter of fact, it was quite the opposite. And they weren't supported immediately post that, which meant that they were distressed and away from work for an extended period of time. So the return to work for those guys actually would have been a lot more efficient if they would actually captured, debrief quickly, let them know that they'd done a great job. Yes, it did capture the media attention, but it's not their fault. Their response was really effective, and they would have been much more inclined and much better in position to return to work very shortly after the incident. Now, this man here is a great man by the name of Darren Hodge, and he's part of the HEMS crew for Southeast around Gippsland in particular. And his example is one of those examples. First major incident he was involved in a number of years ago, which he wrote a book about called Life on the Line. Great read if you can get your hands on it. And he was involved in a major incident where there was a road accident rescue off the side of a cliff, and they had to come in and sort of do some very high ropes rescue pieces on top of the actual really technical ambulance response, which resulted in a double amputee in the field, which is a pretty unheard of event. Now, the decisions that he made on that day were life-saving for that particular individual. Obviously, they were a major impact as well because the person was a double amputee. The response from the overall incident didn't include the debrief or the formal debrief, and didn't include him as part of that formal debrief process, which he has suffered significantly from post, to the point where it's been probably the major incident that, despite all the different incidents he's been involved in over the years and the different amazing responses he's had, it's been the one that's left its most indelible mark on him mentally throughout his career. Roll forward to the start of this year. He was involved in turning out to a scene down at Inverloch, where a young person had unfortunately been stabbed accidentally when they were fishing. So a young child. He brought the whole crew together that didn't know each other, the ambulance crew on the scene, plus the HEMS crew that flew in, plus the police. And he said that we did an immediate debrief after that, and the feedback from all the team was that helped them significantly, particularly with the stress and challenge that they felt, and the mental anguish that they were all feeling, having to turn up to such a difficult scene. So you can see that the quick debriefs are really important for ensuring that you're really acknowledging the situation that you've gone through, you're capturing some of those immediate lessons that you have, and it also enables you to capture and do that mental check-in, the mental welfare check-in on the well-being of all the responders. And in this context here, I mean, it's one of the worst case scenarios, two of the worst case scenarios you could be involved in. But to have that support for each other as part of it becomes so crucial for the ongoing return to work. Your deliberate debriefs, these are the ones that if you're not doing now, you want to be doing, and more often than not, you want to try and get either some external support facilitation for those, because you can get that third perspective without having to ask some of the difficult questions, or you get comfortable asking those difficult questions of your executives. Now, if that's a challenge point for you, that's where a third party really come in supporting does help out, or particularly when you're looking at facilitating the instant debrief, then it becomes, again, an important step. But again, you're really using that as an opportunity to capture the lessons learned, the structural issues, the different challenges that you found, the process and the plan and the response and the business continuity plans, the recovery, all those different components that lead into it. And as part of that overall response is really what you're digging into as part of the process. Setting up for these is really important because you want to make sure that you're getting the right scope to the team and you're getting the right engagement from them. And if you are interviewing, then you're doing those beforehand, and then you're facilitating the more workshop-based approaches from there as well. The approach to take in these, and this is a quote from Mark Armand, who was a coach at Cora Rutherglen Football Club. He would always talk about being curious or approaching a situation in a curious way versus being offended. So that's part of a really good mindset that you can build with the team. So if you use the sporting analogy or the footy analogy, again, it's about playing the ball versus playing the man, or playing the person. So curious over offended means that everyone's coming into it with an open mind. Their focus is on learning, and we want to empower everyone to have a safe discussion as part of that overall response. And importantly, we want to make sure that we're capturing, again, the impact on people and acknowledging that these situations often have an indelible impact on them. This is some of the, and one of the resources I've got for you guys here as well is really the focal area. So they're the different inputs to the capability. So, they're the mechanics again. So the activation, the team objective, what they start off with, the structure, the process, plans, procedures, your stakeholders, all those different things become different elements of the response you can break down. The communications, the engagement, and then also when you're looking at the leadership commitment, which is down the bottom of the page, you can't see it on this one. They're the ones that are a bit more difficult to assess and more challenging to assess as part of a group, but they're important ones to go into. They're important components that you actually really want to really drill into, because I haven't been involved in any single incident, I don't think, where communications and leadership impact on the situation hasn't been important. So being comfortable dealing and discussing that, or dealing in those discussions and dealing with those different aspects of the response becomes so crucial, because if you don't go there, then you're never going to learn the lessons for those leaders. And there's two broad areas I look at: what worked well, what could be improved. Other terminology that you use might be sustain or improve was what we used to use in the military. So the things that work well, you want to sustain, and obviously the improvement areas are things you need to improve on. But it's important to acknowledge that it's not just who was responsible for that. It's more about who's responsible for fixing that, or which area of the business is responsible coming out of this. So we want to make sure that there's an accountability in the different areas of response to either sustain that activity or improve it going forward. So allocating that person or group that's going to be responsible for fixing that, if it's required, is an important step there, I find too. Otherwise, we're just talking about lessons. We're not talking about actual learning from it. Post, I often find, particularly for a deliberate debrief, that you want to look at some sort of formal report is often the case. And you want to follow up on that to make sure that the action planning really kicks off. It is easy, again, especially when you've been through such a difficult response like COVID, such a far-reaching impact like COVID, that fatigue just kicks in. People just want to move on. What we want to do is make sure we're not forgetting those lessons that we've learned, and we're capturing them, and we're using it not just from a crisis management, crisis leadership perspective, we're actually using it from an organizational development perspective, so that we're moving the organization from being more reactive to any sort of risks to being more proactive or adaptive as per the model. Really wrapping up, the debriefing process needs to be really baked into your overall organizational response. The more we can empower teams, capture different perspectives, and learn the lessons very quickly from situations that we're involved in, the more adaptive, proactive, and collaborative we can be. Empowering your individuals as part of an overall organizational development outcome is so crucial now. We know the lessons that we've heard around empowerment, engagement for your staff. And importantly, and one we can't forget as part of any debrief situation, the mental well-being of all of our people becomes so crucial. So having that face-to-face or having that catch up with them separately is an important step to ensuring the ongoing mental support, mental welfare recovery post any situation. We've seen again this time around, whilst there's not been a lot of people within organisations that might have been directly affected by the virus, we've all had the second line impacts. A lot of people out there concerned about their jobs, a lot of people out there concerned about the ongoing livelihoods. And regardless of the nature or type of incident that we've been involved in, I've had 3 cyber events this year, 1 outage and 2 cyber attacks. They still have a mental impact on the organisation, whether it be fatigue levels of the people involved or the concerns that they have and share with each other as part of any incident. So capturing that mental health component becomes so crucial as part of your debrief process. Some quick resources for you, which we'll distribute to you after this, will be, we'll have the outline debrief template form that we've got there. I've obviously been doing a lot of these. We've been doing them both remotely and facilitated remotely. So I'm obviously available as a resource to support in that process as well. And we've done, as we've said, I've had 7 major responses this year, and each of them being debriefed. Ranging from cyclones, cyber attacks, fires, etc., throughout this year. So it's important, again, that you capture those as part of that debrief process to help improve your team going forward. Remember, focus on those mechanics and the dynamics, not just about the structure and process and plan, but also about the team engagement and the team dynamics, and also the communications and the mental health wellbeing. I'll send some of those resources, and like I said, next week we're going to be looking at a comparative case study. I'm going to dig into, no pun intended, the response from the BHP Samarco incident a few years ago compared to the Jukin Gorge incident recently, and look at the 2 different crisis responses to the 2 different outcomes. So I look forward to seeing some of you guys along next week. If you like listening to the podcast, I should have that other one up, hopefully, touch wood, this week with Clint Honeycutt. It is a belter. And look forward to any feedback as we're going along. Now I believe, unmute some of you. So I'm going to stop recording from here and thank anyone else that's going to listen online from here. And what I'll do is I'll open it up so we can hopefully take any questions.